Well, welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Someone who I've become acquainted with over the past little while, Douglas Elliott, a constitutional lawyer, an LGBT rights advocate, and a really prolific writer, poster on social media. Someone who really has done a great job of remembering some important people in Canadian history. Posted recently about the death of someone he described as his old friend, but also one of Canada's greatest AIDS activists of all time. Her name was Janet Connors. And so I wanted to reach out to Douglas Elliott and ask him to tell us a little bit about his friend, Janet Connors, who was this friend, but also one of Canada's greatest AIDS activists. Douglas, welcome to the show again.
Thank you, Brian. It's sad to be always here talking about my friends who have passed away, but somebody like Janet, was a really great person, and she deserves to be remembered for sure. Tell us
a little bit about her, if you could.
Yes, well, Janet and I are the same age, actually. So she was 66. She's was born in Vancouver. She lived in Northwest Territories for a time. She lived back in BC for a bit. She had a son named Gus by a previous relationship, but she moved to Nova Scotia when she was a young woman with Gus. And really, for me, I really identified Janet with Nova Scotia. She really took to Nova Scotia like a duck to water. She was a Nova Scotian through and through. But she was just, for most of her life, she was just a regular person, She worked as a laboratory technologist. There's Janet with her doctorate from Mount St. Vincent University. She worked as a laboratory technologist initially, and she used to get pushed around by the doctors. So when she got her honorary doctorate, she felt really great about being called Dr. Connors. She actually was so well respected that she got that honorary doctorate in 1997 from Mount St. Vincent University, and she went on to collect 2 more from Acadia University and from Dalhousie. So when Janet moved to Nova Scotia, she met a fellow named Randy Connors, who became the great love of her life and really changed her life. Randy was a hemophiliac, and Randy, in 1985, like a lot of hemophiliacs, found out that he was HIV positive. And that really rocked their world. But you need to remember, your viewers need to remember that 1985, 1986, we didn't know a lot about what being HIV positive meant. We knew what having AIDS meant, but we didn't really know a lot about what having HIV meant. And unfortunately, at that time, there was a lot of mythology and stigma associated with HIV and AIDS. And a lot of people saw AIDS as a gay disease. And even the Red Cross and some of the doctors felt that the hemophiliacs were just going to be HIV positive, and they weren't going to go on to develop AIDS. It was one of the worst cases of wishful thinking, I think, in Canadian history. I remember having conversation. There's Randy and Janet at the Creever inquiry, which is where I met them. That's actually the day that I met them. That particular shot. They were once they found out about the HIV, they were told, "Look, you don't have to worry. Janet's never going to get HIV. Randy, you're never going to get AIDS. You got nothing to worry about." I thought this was craziness, by the way. I was involved in the AIDS Committee of Toronto at the time, and I screamed from the rooftops that the hemophiliacs should be getting information about safe sex. And the response I got from the Red Cross was, "Well, Doug, you don't understand. These are nice, normal people that want to have children." And I was also told that, about the miracle of the vagina, that somehow the fact that it was heterosexual intercourse was going to protect them from this virus. To which I rejoined, okay, when in the history of infectious disease has there ever been a sexually transmitted disease that only affected gay men and never affected heterosexuals? It made absolutely no sense to me. Anyway, Janet and Randy did actually, they were a bit skeptical about this advice, and they practiced safe sex. Janet was an amazing person because she had her science training as a lab technologist. She did all her own research. She could read all these scientific journals and form her own opinion about what was going on. And she used to provide sort of informal advice to people in the hemophilia community who, you know, had traditionally been very submissive and very patronized by the Red Cross and by the medical profession. I was involved in the 1980s, the late 1980s, trying to get compensation for people who got HIV from blood products or blood transfusions. And it was pretty, it was pretty challenging back then, I got to tell you. You know, you were suing the governments, you were suing the Red Cross. They had tons of money. They had, and one of the things, one of their main weapons, frankly, was the fact that my clients did not want to go public. My clients would never talk to somebody like you, Brian. Really? Never. In fact, it was, the stigma was terrible. Look, they didn't want to come to my office because they were afraid one of their friends might see them coming out of my office and figure out that they had AIDS.
These were hemophiliacs or
hemophiliacs and people who got HIV from blood transfusions. They used to ask me to send letters in plain envelopes to their homes because they're afraid if the mailman saw my name on the envelope, they would put two and two together and figure out that they had AIDS. The paranoia and the stigma cannot be overstated. We didn't have anybody who was willing to go public, and along came Janet and Randy. The federal government in 1989 decided to offer compensation, $30,000 a year for 4 years in a row. And it was then that Randy discovered, it was around that time that Randy discovered that Janet was infected. And he discovered that, contrary to what he had been told before, he now met the criteria of having what we used to refer to as full-blown AIDS. He was going to die. And he was really angry. And he and Janet decided to go public. They were the first hemophiliac couple. Well, he was the hemophiliac. It's a male disease. He and Janet were the first two to go public about this thing. And to me, I got to tell you, this was a godsend to have this really lovely, articulate, loving couple as an example of the people who had been injured by the tainted blood scandal. Frankly, Brian, I hate to be cynical, but I'm going to be cynical. When this compensation program was introduced, the people who put it forward, they expected all of these folks were going to be dead within 4 years. And that's why they had a 4-year program. Partly it was about, they thought they were going to be dead. At the time, the provinces and the Red Cross wanted the federal government, it was the Liberals in power then, they wanted the federal government to make it a condition of getting the federal money that you were not allowed to sue the Red Cross and the provinces. And the federal government said, well, how much money are you going to contribute to this? They said none. And the federal government said, then forget it. We're not going to fight for you to get a release. We'll let people sue you. So that there was a whole bunch of lawsuits, and there was a demand for public inquiry. Because of the lobbying that Janet and Randy did with George Moody, who was the provincial health minister in Nova Scotia, up until that point in 1993, all of the provinces had this unity. You know, they circled the wagons and they said, we're not going to give any of these people compensation. What they got from the feds is enough. But of course, that rang hollow when you realized that these people were still alive in 1993. The payment, there wasn't going to be a payment in 1993. And George Moody said, we're going to change that. And soon after that, all the dominoes toppled. All of the provinces agreed to provide compensation. And they finally agreed to have a full-scale inquiry, the Creever Inquiry, that was appointed in 1993 and started its hearings on Valentine's Day in 1994. And it was in 1994 that I met Janet and Randy for the first time, because their activism had all been based in Nova Scotia, and I was, of course, practicing law in Toronto at the time. And they were really, for many Canadians, I mean, they went from being known in Nova Scotia to being known nationally. They eventually were, in 1993, they were in Maclean's magazine. They were covered by Maclean's magazine for their advocacy around tainted blood. They were really the face of this tragic situation in Canada. And, you know, there wouldn't have been a Creever inquiry into the blood system without Janet and Randy Connors. That's for sure. And there wouldn't have been compensation. It was quite a good compensation package that eventually emerged from the provinces and the Red Cross that picked up where the federal program left off.
You wrote quite a poignant tribute to her, and one of your paragraphs reads, "The Creever Inquiry and the civil litigation brought by myself and others resulted in dramatic consequences. The Red Cross became insolvent and was forced to seek court protection from its creditors. It was forced to give up running the blood system. It pled guilty to a criminal offense and finally apologized for all the harm it had done to people like Janet." We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with some concluding comments from Douglas Elliott about his friend who passed away this past weekend, who he calls one of the greatest AIDS activists of all times, Janet Connors. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Douglas Elliott. He is a constitutional lawyer, and he's a LGBT rights activist. He's been long involved in this. And this weekend, he wrote really quite a poignant tribute to someone I didn't know, but I was really moved by what he wrote. And it was about Janet Connors, who passed away. And he called Janet one of Canada's greatest AIDS activists of all times. And I just wanted to, before I turn it back to Doug to talk about his friend, I just wanted to read two other paragraphs, if I could, from his tribute, because it was really quite good. "Janet did not rest on her laurels, but continued to play a fearless leadership role in the AIDS movement and in the Nova Scotia Hemophiliac Society. She was an implacable foe of homophobia. Janet was rightly showered with honors for her work, including the Meritorious Service Medal, the Nova Scotia Human Rights Award, and 3 honorary doctorates. She really got a kick out of being called Dr. Connors. Janet was a kind, caring, and courageous human being. She was an attractive woman and always fun to be with. However, she always held others to account regardless of who they might be, and always expected everyone to do their best. Janet also took pleasure from simple things like gardening and sharing recipes. She was a bit of a pack rat, and all of her papers and clippings are now in the Janet Connors funds at Dalhousie." Douglas, this was a wonderful tribute that you wrote to your friend.
Thank you. Well, she was she was one of those people who was an accidental activist. If she and her husband hadn't gotten HIV, she would have had a quiet, happy life in Nova Scotia. No one would know anything about her. But she rose to the occasion, and she became a great Canadian. She also had a terrific sense of humor. You mentioned all of those various awards, but one of her favorite awards of all time was when a group in Halifax honored her with a certificate certifying her as an honorary gay man. She thought that was fantastic.
An honorary gay man.
An honorary gay man. Yeah, she thought that was great. Her final years, their final months were not great. Ironically, she ended up dying of lung cancer and not AIDS. But she was a granny in her last years, and she never expected in a million years. She hoped to live to see her son graduate from high school. She never expected to live long enough to be a grandmother. And the last time I saw her, she was really happy about being a granny, and had spent the last couple of years doing that. But, Randy back then, he after their years of activism, he said, I was afraid that people would forget me when I died, but now I know that people will remember us, that because Janet and I have left a mark, and there's no doubt about that. The Red Cross doesn't run the blood system in Canada anymore. It's run by Canadian Blood Services, and that's down to Janet and Randy Connors. Janet was the most respected AIDS activist in Canada, I would say. And she was a dear friend and a lovely human being. I'm sorry you never had the chance to meet her, Brian, but I hope that Canadians will always remember her and her contribution to making Canada a better society.
Douglas Elliott, thank you so much for joining us tonight and telling us a little bit about Janet Connors, your friend, and someone you call one of Canada's greatest AIDS activists. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian.
That's our show for tonight. Thank you all for joining us. I really appreciate it. This is personal to me because my best friend was gay, and he passed away recently. And my son, also gay, feels very strongly about the blood system and the restrictions that are placed upon him. And he's fought very strongly against some of the restrictions placed on him donating blood. So even though I never knew Janet Connors, it's a real honor for me to chat with Douglas Elliott about her and her fight. Thank you so much. Good night, everybody.
Good night.